Hello everyone, Raven Knight here. I did a video in the past when Pirate was first announced and they revealed the Outlanders as a concept, and I said in that video that I think the idea of the Outlanders is a great one, but it may come with some drawbacks if the writers aren't careful. Now it's been over a year since that video, and in that time, we've seen 4 Outlander heroes added to the roster: Pirate, Magi, Aphira, and Ocelotl. So, the question is now, was the idea a brilliant one as I surmised in the past? Have the Outlanders given us good quality content? Is the game better now for adding these heroes? Well, the short answer is yes. But the long answer, well, that'll require a bit more discussion. But hey, that's what we're here for. So join me as we tackle the question of the Outlanders, the good and the bad of this brilliant idea. First, we have to understand why the Outlander idea was such a good one to begin with, and that ties into For Honor's greatest problem it was confronting. The greatest problem For Honor had before was that with only a few factions to work with, the Knights, Samurai, Vikings, and later the Wulin, inevitably they were going to run out of warriors to add to the factions. I mean, they kind of cheated a little with the Romans joining the Knights and the Scots and the Picts joining the Vikings, but there are only so many times you can get away with that, right? Eventually, For Honor's factions would fill up and the game would be unable to add new heroes. The obvious solution to this would be to add a new faction, correct? Well, yes, but it's complicated. It's not as easy as you think. When Marching Fire was added and the Wulin were introduced, the community came out in hostility to the Wulin. They were 4 new heroes, all released at once, all unbalanced on release, and all behind a paywall. That was a pretty big mistake as far as the community and the devs were concerned, and to make that mistake again would be costly and near damning for Honor, which is why the Wulin have taken such a backseat lately in the lore and in terms of content. So, obviously, releasing a full faction of Indian or African heroes now is just as risky. So what to do instead? Well, it would be far easier to release each hero one at a time so you have time to let the hero breathe and give the developers time to iron out any issues or balancing problems. This way the community gets their new hero and they don't lose their mind over things like unbalancing and the devs don't care. Plus, instead of focusing on just one culture, why not draw on several? Create a faction that appears to the Outliers, the groups and figures unmentioned in For Honor until now. And this was the brilliance of the Outlanders. You can draw on inspiration from several cultures, get 1 or 2 heroes from them with their own unique weapons, cosmetics, and traditions, and you could repeat this so long as you had cultures to fall back on. It's a stroke of genius, and we've seen that played out in the 4 heroes released so far in For Honor, with the one exception of Pirate, but we will talk about that issue later. Now, the concept was great, as I said, but there was a danger now. By its very nature, For Honor is a story of internal conflict between the 4 powers that be: Knights, Samurai, Vikings, and Wulin. These powers have been at war for 1,000 years, and they've forgotten entirely their real reason for fighting, although they do know that it ties into their differences in culture, tradition, and background. Now, Ubisoft has gone to great lengths to try and water down and dodge the culturally insensitive and controversial aspects of these factions. Like, they've made the Vikings raid for supplies rather than money or slaves, which is different from their historical counterparts, and they have the Christian iconography largely removed from the Knights to try to be a little less controversial. And I guess you could make the argument that after 1,000 years of fighting amongst themselves, we could understand why they would start to water these down. But with these brand new Outlander cultures, this won't be as simple to do, because a large part of what makes some of these cultures so unique are the controversial aspects to them. Would Ubisoft dodge these historical and culturally taboo topics for the sake of sensibilities? Well, the answer to that was made obvious when they brought a historian on in the Ocelotl reveal trailer to say that the developers use history primarily as a jumping off point, but they care less about historical accuracy and more about authenticity. Whatever that means. They will diverge from history when it suits them. And while he didn't say it directly, the implication of his words were very clear. They will use history when it is convenient, but once that history gets controversial or hard to stomach, they don't mind abandoning it or veering away. And this was, as far as I'm concerned, the first major misstep with the Outlanders, but also something that I admittedly foresaw a long time ago. Unfortunately, this misstep does have an impact on the lore of the game. Why is that? Well, it's simple. As I said in one of my previous videos on the topic, history, be it ugly or pretty, is the source of our present, and we have a responsibility to respect it for what it is and understand it rather than hide or flee from it. And this is important for us in the real world, but it's also important in terms of the writing for Honor. Remember, we need conflict for this world to function. The Outlanders need a reason to join this war. They need a purpose. Now, if you look into the historical reasons these warriors fought, you might be able to come up with some creative reasons for them to fight. The pirates, for example, well, they obviously seek plunder and booty. They want money, and that's fine. They're getting that. That works. The Magi are guardians and defenders of their country and people, and their people and country was stolen from, so their reason for fighting fits. But then we get to the Ephyra, and the Ephyra are based on the Islamic Empire. Well, what was their reason? The Islamic Empire historically became powerful through large expansion and invasion. They invaded new territories and assimilated societies and cultures into the Muslim Empire. Now, this is a bit controversial, but it would make sense in the world of For Honor if Ephyra wanted to expand and bring their influence to Heathmore, trying to say, let me make Heathmore better by our influence. It wouldn't be that much different from what the Wu Lin were kind of doing. And what about the Ocelotl? Though their wars and history had practical reasons outside of just human sacrifices, you could use their militaristic expansion practices as well as their need for sacrifice fodder to explain their involvement. All of this could work well. You could make it work in the world of Heathmore that Ubisoft had created. But remember, Ubisoft wants to avoid these more dark aspects to their societies. And as a result of that, their reason for fighting is now lost. The Ephyra aren't trying to expand beyond their borders. They're content to sit in Arabia and look at the world as an outsider. And the Ocelotl no longer do human sacrifices. That's old hat. They no longer do it. They're content to sit in their empire and do their own thing. So what do? How do we get them to come to Heathmore? Well, that goes to the Outlander formula. That is Ubisoft's solution. The Outlander formula. Horkos must become the conflict instigator. They must bring the Outlanders into the fight by playing the villain who instigates and provokes the Outlanders into arriving and fighting. And it's an easy workaround. If you involve the Outlanders and the way that they want revenge on Horkos, and you don't have to explore their darker aspects to their culture, well, that's one way to get them in, I grant you. But this solution has a few flaws, and it can be broken down into two questions. Question 1. What happens when their revenge is achieved? If the Outlanders are not warmongering themselves and they have no ulterior motives for staying in Heathmore, why would they want to stay? Surely the Magi, the Ephyra, and the Ocelotl will want to kill their enemies, and Bullthorn, Ravier, and Vela specifically, and then return home. The Ephyra even rebuilt their celestial sphere, so clearly they want to go back to their empire and put it back to work, I guess. And the Ocelotl lore implies that their citizens are still alive back in Tenochtitlan, because we had the main Ocelotl give himself up specifically so that he could save his people, and they would leave his people alone, right? So once they get their revenge on their targets, why not go home? Unless something else draws them to Heathmore, or they have some kind of ulterior reason for staying, they have no real reason to stay after getting their revenge, and the longer they stay, the more exposed and endangered their homelands become. And then question number 2. If Horkos is their primary enemy, the people who brought them here after all, why don't they join Chimera, Horkos' enemy? Or if they don't want to join Chimera, at the very least, why don't they ignore the rest of Heathmore? Just focus on where Horkos is and destroy their leadership. I mean, look, think of it like this. It was not Heathmore that sparked their anger. It was Horkos. It was Ravier. It was Vela. It was Astria. So technically, would it not be prudent for them to ally with Chimera, or at the very least, leave the rest of Heathmore alone? What threat are they to the rest of Heathmore if only Horkos is their prey? Now, you might argue, well, there are cultural differences that would make them clash with the rest of Heathmore. But remember, there's nothing sinister about the cultures of Ephyra and Ocelotl thanks to Ubisoft. Those cultural taboos have been removed. See, remember I said it earlier, the reason these For Honor factions originally fought was for internal conflict reasons that had to do with their cultural differences. They couldn't remember the specific reasons, but it tied into their cultural differences. Now that we've removed any cultural nuance from these new factions, that reason is now gone. The only reason they have to be here is because Horkos kicked the hornet's nest. Now, what reason do the Hornets have to stay after they've killed the invader? Now, some of you might be arguing that I'm reading too deep into the lore, that I'm just a history simp, and that I demand everything be historically accurate. And yes, I do love history. I don't deny it. I'm a historian. But I don't demand everything be historically accurate. What I want is not necessarily accuracy. What I want is cause and reason. Why do the Outlanders come? Why do they stay? And what is their ultimate goal for staying? If it's truly nothing more complex or unique than simply Horkos hurt us so now we want revenge, then I have to ask, why should I care for the long-term story? It seems largely hypocritical for the developers to brag about how much they love sharing their cultures with the world, but they insist on not indulging in the true complexities and darker aspects of those cultures. Sure, history is not always pretty, but you could show it from a new perspective. Take the human sacrifice aspect. Yes, human sacrifice is dark, but why not explain it from the vantage point of the Ocelotl? Why not show their devotion to their gods? Their desire to protect all of creation through their deeds. Make the behavior noble through context and perspective. Because if you truly care about these Outlanders and their culture, is it too much to ask that you show it? But I'd also go so far as to say that there have been other missed opportunities than just this. For example, I mentioned it earlier, but I'll bring it up now. I think one of the greatest sins of all was making Pirate the first Outlander and not Griffin. See, Pirate doesn't hail from another country or culture. She's a Wulin sea pirate. True, she doesn't have any loyalty to the Wulin Empire, but let's face it, the Highlanders, the Shamans, the Hitokiris, the Jormungandrs, and the Romans don't really have any allegiance to the Knights, Vikings, or Samurai. Most only fight because of old oaths or out of convenience. So why couldn't the pirate just be lumped in with the Wulin? I'm not one of those people who gets upset that we didn't get a Caribbean pirate. Quite the contrary. I'm really pleased we got a Chinese pirate. I think it fits better. But wouldn't Griffin have been a better choice for the Outlanders? A former knight who traveled the world, met other cultures, and in the end returned, and though in the knight faction now in the roster, he doesn't even consider himself a knight anymore. This amalgamation of different cultures in one warrior would have been a fantastic vanguard for the Outlander faction, introducing us to the idea that there is more beyond Heathmoor than simply just knights, Vikings, samurai, and Wulin. As a matter of fact, now that I think about it, why haven't any of the Outlanders had any relationship or contact with Griffin? He said he traveled around as a mercenary. Why hasn't he brought any cultures in with him as allies against Horkos? I mean, after all, Astria and Bo Yin, the leader of the pirates, supposedly have a relationship and knew each other beforehand. Why couldn't Griffin have had a relationship with, say, Neferka, or the leader of the Aethera, or the leader of the Ocelotl? Is it so far-fetched to believe that Griffin would also have friends who are Outlanders? Is it too crazy to assume he couldn't have made friends with pirates, or the Medjai, or anyone else? Given his understanding of the importance of diversity and other groups, maybe he would benefit from reaching out to Aethera and Ocelotl. But it is in this failing that we see another major problem. The Chimera and Horkos War was, and probably will always be, entirely irrelevant, but we'll save that for another video. We're getting off topic. I don't want to say that the Outlanders are a failure. Absolutely not. Like I said, they may very well have saved For Honor from a floundering future. They gave the opportunity to add new heroes, new cosmetics, new battle passes, new events, and new ideas to this game that it was in desperate need of revitalization. It really did save the game. I am very grateful for the Outlanders. It's expanding the world. We're seeing more of the world beyond Heathmoor. Yes, I do miss the simpler days of Knights, Vikings, and Samurai, but I also recognize that without changes and additional content, this game just couldn't last. So I'm glad for the Outlanders and what they've done for the game. But what makes me sad is simply what they could have been. This could have been a real opportunity for creative, complex, and even nuanced lore. Not just cringy, Horkos bad, Chimera good, edgy people play Horkos, goody two-shoes play Chimera. But it could have been actually nuanced. Could have been complicated lore that ties into real-world cultures, real-world groups, and actually fascinating history. I know that their goal isn't necessarily to teach, and I'm not asking them to, but you could have done such interesting things just by looking to their history rather than making such a juvenile direction. Like I said, what we have now is so juvenile, lackluster, and it's filled with holes and complications. And again, I'm sure there are some of you out there who think I just want everything historical, and my response to that is this. This game was predicated on historical warriors and historical cultures and peoples. I mean, that's why we can even discuss and look forward to ideas like Aztec warriors, or potential Spartan, or Rajput, or African warriors. Because these warriors that we want to see in For Honor are real and historical, and that's why we can hope for them to be added to this game. But if history matters so little, if our response is, why does everything have to be historical, then I must ask you, Why do you care if why do we care if we get historical warriors? And why do you care if they're properly represented? Why should we care if the Medjay only has dark skin? Why should we complain that the Pirates of Rafira are all gender-locked? Why should we be bothered that the Vikings don't have historically accurate armor? If you actually care about it, couldn't that be a criticism of you, that you only care about history and aren't caring about what the game has given us? See, that's the thing. You can't complain that this game does not meet some historical standards, but then accuse others of caring too much about history. That's going to be about it for me. But before I go, I do want to reiterate, I love the Outlanders. I think that they have done so much good for this game. And I love each of the heroes we've gotten. The Pirate, the Medjay, the Aphira, and the Ocelotl. All have given something so unique to the game. We've seen some awesome years added to For Honor because of them. I'm looking forward to so much more that they have to offer. But I want to make this clear. As brilliant as the idea of the Outlanders is, there is a danger. If we're so ready to toss aside the aspects of history that we don't like, but only keep the parts that are nice and friendly, then what are we going to get out of it? Something watered down, something mediocre, and something juvenile. Ubisoft, regardless of what your historian said, you need to understand this. If you want to treat your player base like adults, if you want to treat them as people with common sense, if you want to have respect for our intelligence, don't give us juvenile kiddie crap. This whole Horkos bad, Outlanders good, Outlander formula that you've been creating is going to get old fast. People are going to notice it get old fast. There's got to be a change. I want to see a change. I'm willing to offer ideas. I offered some with Griffin. Let's see what you guys can do. I'm looking forward to the future. That's all I got for you today, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Take care.